I do think there were a couple guys, and obviously Kike Hernandez posted
made a
something.
Great statement. One of the more high-profile players and more beloved players in LA made a very, very strong statement about what was going on. Were the Dodgers almost kind of shielding themselves behind that?
No.
Or was it already an outcry at that point that the Dodgers, as an organization, needed to make a statement?
Well, I think they had to, but they've kind of, they do a lot of this, like if there's like a line in the room, like they just tell you to like freeze, those people who just kind of freeze and, okay, if I don't move, maybe they won't see me type thing. That's kind of like a lot of their approaches to different things.
Yo, welcome to another episode of In a Minute with Evan Lovett, coming to you live from the IM studios in the heart of Los Angeles. And this episode was a long time coming, probably about 25 plus years, because that's how long I have known today's guest, LA Times columnist and newspaper veteran Dylan Hernandez, a close friend, but also a man with a huge impact in the LA sports journalism world. In fact, recently called the LA Dodgers cowardly for their mute approach to the ice raids here in Los Angeles. So we're going to get into that, but we're also going to get into Dylan's very fascinating background and just LA sports in general. So Dylan, first and foremost, thank you for being here. Thanks for finally coming on the show.
No, thanks for having me. I know, right, when I moved back to LA, when was that, 07?
Yeah.
I think we started off doing lunch every 6 months to kind of catch up, and then it became once a year. And now we've gone a couple years, I think, without doing that. So,
but
now we're here.
But
our kids played soccer together.
There we go. Yeah. But this past season, we kind of reconnect. We always kept in touch, though.
We did.
We text at the very least. Yeah. But this past season, his son played soccer with my son, or should I say mine played with his, because his is very talented. My kid's very talented, but he's also somewhat timid on the soccer field. He's very athletic, but that
was engineered, because my brother called me and he's like, hey, do you want to just hang out with Evan? Let me just pick his kid.
Perfect. So that worked out. And you know what? We had a damn good season. We went to the state championships in Bakersfield. That was a lot of fun. Yeah. And I got to hang out with Dylan and kind of reconnect a little bit more. So before we get into it, I have to thank the sponsor of the show, the one and only Ardo Brick. Rehabilitation and renovation, that is, of historic Los Angeles landmarks from Olvera Street to Mariachi Plaza to some areas at USC. Ardo Brick has a factory in Gardena. That's where they're headquartered. They're run by my man Armin, who is a great dude, LA dude, third generation company, true LA American dream story. And again, I want to reemphasize those bricks on Olvera Street, Mariachi Plaza, that beautiful little overhang, everything. That's what Ardo Brick does. They fabricate these historic bricks and rebuild these monuments in Los Angeles so we can enjoy the history in the present. So thank you, Ardo Brick. But thank you, Dylan. All right, listen, I'm going to start off with the hot issue because that's what we got to talk about. So, look, LA Times, I've had comments on. I've had previous episodes dedicated specifically to the downfall of the LA Times. But the fact is, I get the LA Times every single day, print edition, still a subscriber.
Why?
Because I like the paper and it's my heart and soul. I started out with, my first job out of college was with the LA Times, in fact. And I think journalism is so important. And what you're doing is important and had an impact because you were, I think, maybe the only sports journalist anywhere to really call out the Dodgers for not taking a stance against these ice raids that have so deeply affected Los Angeles. Lay out how that happened and where that came from for you.
I mean, it was just kind of a natural reaction to seeing what was happening, right? And obviously, the Dodgers are very, boastful almost of their Latino, fan base, right? I mean, every opportunity that they have it, obviously they still have those, they bring out like the mariachi bands on like Sunday, whatever, behind center field and, all these different bobbleheads and promotions. And, and so when this stuff was happening, now the team was on the road initially, right? And so I kind of figured, well, I'll give them a couple of days maybe to say something. And, now they came home without having said anything and things had kind of just started to ramp up in town, right? And I just kind of, especially with the Dodgers, right? It's just like, right? They kind of wrap themselves in the flag of Jackie Robinson, right? Yeah. They sell themselves as more than just a baseball team, right? Absolutely. They were the team that was okay with Koufax not pitching on Yom Kippur. Right. They were the ones that expanded baseball's borders, right? By signing Fernando Valenzuela, Hideo Nomo, Chan-Ho Park, their academy in the Dominican Republic, right? And so, and it's not just kind of this history that they have. They also have commercialized that history, right? And now, right, Jackie Robinson Day jerseys that the players wear, those things, you can find them in the gift shop selling for like thousands of dollars or whatever. Right. And I just kind of feel like, well, if you're going to if that's going to be your identity, it can't just be something of the past. You need to continue to live that, right? And it's not, and I get, look, they're a business and some of these things are difficult, right? But, I was going, right, it wasn't like when Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier that everybody was like, oh, yeah, good for you, right? I mean, it was not, right? And there
very difficult.
And there were also these kind of disingenuous arguments like against, integrating baseball, right? People were feigning concerns for like, oh, what's going to happen to the Negro Leagues? Like anybody actually care? Can I cuss on this show, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Like anybody actually gave a shit about that, right?
Right.
Like, so, and that's kind of the thing, right? Being on the right side of history kind of requires, a set of balls, so to speak. And, and here's the other part of this. I know these people, right? I know these people that like run this and, and this is kind of par for the course with them, right?
You're talking ownership, Caston, Walter.
Or upper management. Okay. So Mark Walter is kind of, he's right. So he's the principal owner. He's the head of Guggenheim Investments or Guggenheim Partners. He lives in Chicago. He's not here.
I didn't even know that.
So
good to know.
Basically, this organization, right? It's run by Stan Kasten. He's the team president. He used to be the president of the the Atlanta Braves, right? And he was right. He basically oversaw Ted Turner's sports empire. At one point, he was the GM of the Hawks, the Braves, and whatever the name of their hockey team is there.
Okay. Right.
And I apologize to the hockey fans out there. And then Lon Rosen, who used to be Magic Johnson's agent, right? Okay. And so, when Magic came in as, kind of the face of their ownership group, Lon basically was the guy who kind of came in, because again, Magic, even though he said he was going to be there every day, he was almost never around.
Right.
And so Lon was the guy kind of overseeing his interests. And so those two guys have kind of overseen, the running of this thing. And again, to me, it was very, okay, they're kind of doing their thing again, right? It's kind of profit over like anything else, I think you talk to a lot of the people there in terms of the work culture there and stuff, right? I mean, again, this is all kind of par for the course, right? We go back to the Trevor Bauer thing.
Not shocking for you.
Not at all, right? We go back to the Trevor Bauer thing.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of employees that were upset that, Trevor Bauer was like Voldemort, right? You couldn't even like say his name almost. Wow. And, I think a lot of the kind of rank and file employees, right? And you got to keep in mind, this isn't just a baseball team. It's not just a baseball ops department. Yeah. You have marketing departments. You have people that deal with ticket sales.
Yeah, it's a big,
it's a big company. And I think there was an expectation, in the workforce that something would be said about this. How did you sign this guy, even though we knew he was kind of a problem, right? Yeah. Some kind of acknowledgement of like, hey, like, we're sorry, right? Some of you have to go through this. There are a lot of female employees there.
Right.
And that never came, right? And
I didn't even realize that. So the Dodgers never gave a statement about Bauer after the...
I don't think they did, yeah. Because, I mean, their thing was kind of, well, the union rules, they could sue us, right?
I remember that.
Right. But even internally, though, and that's kind of the point, right? Even like internally within kind of the workforce, I think a lot of the people that were working there, right, that kind of felt like embarrassed all of a sudden now, right? Because, I mean, look, you go work for the Dodgers, like, you should be proud, right? Same thing with like...
one of my dreams growing up, absolutely.
Right? I mean, you work for like a big institution. It happens to us too, right? Every now and then you're kind of like, oh, God, I work here now, And when that happens, I think you would like leadership to address these things, and it did not get addressed at all. And so I think they were kind of hoping... that, again, people's love of the Dodgers would just kind of overwhelm their disgust for Trump and his right, whatever it is they're doing, right, their kidnappings or whatever you want to call them, and that this thing would just kind of blow by. But obviously, things kind of...
So what was the impetus for you to write that column then? So you were waiting. And I know that at the time there was a groundswell of, I'm not even going to say support because it's opposite, a groundswell of antagonism towards the Dodgers from some serious Dodger supporters and groups. I mean, let's be honest. I saw the stat that 44% of the Dodger fan base is Latino. It seems higher, to be honest with you, when you go to the stadium. But regardless, it's a significant portion of the population of LA, and when you go to Dodger Stadium. And a lot of people, important people, LA Taco, journalistic organization, typically Dodger supporting, we're coming out pretty vocal, like, where are the Dodgers? Some other organizations are like, how can you support the Dodgers? Obviously, Buried Under the Blue has always been kind of tugging on the Dodgers to even acknowledge the land grab of the 1950s with the communities, Bishop, La Loma, Palo Verde, I think they were. And the Dodgers have never formally acknowledged that either, but it really grew into this kind of thing, like, what's going on with the Dodgers? So what made you decide to finally put pen to paper and say, like, this is what we're going to do?
Honestly, it's just the fact that they came home, right?
Yeah.
I didn't want to do this, obviously, without talking to anybody,
yeah.
right? Giving them a chance to respond.
Yeah.
Because I do think there's kind of this misconception a lot of times that, like, we're just going to people to go bother them, right? The truth is, I mean, that's almost like the worst part of my job, right? That I have to talk to people.
Right.
But I feel an obligation to give them an opportunity to either give me their side or, right, even kind of change my perspective on things.
And by the way, that's being a journalist, and people don't understand. I always pound the table for journalism, and everybody's like, fake news and all this kind of stuff. And look, we all have opinions on certain news organizations and things like that. But at least growing up, we kind of came up together through the ranks. Journalism really is talking to both sides, getting the facts, all the opinions, talking to people, and then letting the readers, the listeners, the viewers kind of decide. But go on.
So I went out to the stadium. I asked first I started by asking the PR staff, are you guys going to say anything? Is anybody available to talk about this? They said no. So that was going to be that. And I was just going to, right now, when somebody no comments, it almost allows you to just kind of go off. And then Lon Rosen popped out into the dugout. And so I went to go ask him about, do you guys have anything to say about this? And he said, we're not going to say anything. I asked him, in light of this, do you guys regret going to the White House?
Yeah.
Right. Because that was a column that I wrote earlier, too. I think back in like March, whenever, right, the team announced that they were going to go to the White House. Yeah. And they kind of try to do this, well, it's not political. I don't know how
it's not about who's in the White House. Right. It's about the honor
office
of going to the White House.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And so.
By the way, did all the players go on that trip?
I think all the players that were on that trip, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And look, I don't think everybody like necessarily wanted to go.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that, right, Mookie Betts talked a little bit about this publicly about how, when he won with the Red Sox, and he went during he declined to go during Trump's first term, that it kind of became this like issue, right? Now all of a sudden that's a story.
And he said he didn't want to make it about him.
Correct.
Right.
Like baseball club, right. Look, baseball tends to be a fairly conservative, baseball clubhouses are conservative spaces.
Yeah.
Right. You guys would probably, a lot of you that probably listen to this podcast would be very disappointed to learn where your favorite
politics
right,
inside a baseball clubhouse,
where your favorite player's politics lie. Right. I mean, that's kind of the odds.
Never meet your heroes, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah.
So stuff like that can kind of create like a divide in the clubhouse, right? And so, I think that Mookie probably didn't want to do that. I mean, you look at, and if you look at, not to make this too much of a sports thing, but you look at everything Mookie's done from playing at second base to now playing shortstop, has actually been done. I know it's kind of been looked at as like, oh, like he wants to do something different type thing. But no, like what's really kind of driving this, I do think, is, hey, how do we get the best 9 guys out on the field at the same time?
Right.
And his calculation has just been, okay, well, you need a second baseman, I can be the second baseman, right? You need a shortstop, I can be the shortstop.
Right.
And so, he's a very team-oriented guy, and I think that he didn't want to kind of like split up this clubhouse that obviously has a chance to win a championship, you know? So I do think there were a couple guys, and obviously Kike Hernandez posted something.
Made a great statement. He made probably the first Dodgers. I mean, again, not on the team's behalf, but he made it very serious. I'm not born and raised in LA, but I've been embraced by this city, and what's happening is atrocious, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So that almost, tell me if the Dodgers almost kind of hid behind the shield of that for a little bit, because at least one of their, maybe not one of their best players, although in the postseason he is, one of their more high profile players and more beloved players in LA made a very, very strong statement about what was going on. Were the Dodgers almost kind of shielding themselves behind that? Or was it already an outcry at that point that the Dodgers as an organization needed to make a statement?
Well, I think they had to, but they've kind of, they do a lot of this, Like if there's like I don't know, like a line in the room, like they just tell you to like freeze, like those people who just kind of freeze and, okay, if I don't move, maybe they won't see me type thing. That's kind of like a lot of their approaches to different things. I remember years ago, right, Bryce Harper was a free agent. I think a lot of, right, at the Fan Fest, people were even chanting Harper's name.
It's my guy right there.
And,
absolutely.
I asked Kasten about it.
Yeah.
And Kasten's first thing was, what are you even talking about? Right. He goes like, I don't sense that the fans want any, like they're happy. We sell out every night. Right. And those comments obviously didn't come across great because it's basically like, hey, they're giving us their money. They must be happy. Right. And kind of the indirect message was, it doesn't matter what shit we throw out there. These people are going to come out anyway.
Right.
And I just kind of know from people that are in the office, right. The next day, people were reading the paper and kind of cringing.
Yeah.
And Kasten was, kind of pretended like nothing happened. Right. Wow. So this is just kind of, again, that culture where I just think that even with stuff like that, good or bad or whatever it is, like they just kind of they're just hoping if we just kind of stand still, do nothing, this problem will just like magically evaporate.
Well, something like that obviously here in LA isn't going to happen. But I haven't seen a boycott, an organized boycott. I haven't seen a huge impact. Yeah. My sister-in-law, Mexican, went to Dodger Stadium probably within the week after your column ran. Yeah. And she was like, you know what? It was awesome. It felt the same. She's like, I saw some people in serapes. I saw some people in like Mexican colored Dodger gear. But she's like, I didn't see a lot of outcry. I didn't feel any guff. I didn't feel any pressure. She's like, it felt like a Dodger game. Yeah. So for the Dodgers not to have this statement, it really hasn't impacted the bottom line, which would be the one thing that would maybe get their attention, right?
It hasn't yet, right? And by that, I mean, if they win, look, winning solves everything, right? Right. Look, I think, this is kind of like a larger discussion, whatever, but I just kind of think like life is becoming like increasingly just like intolerable, right? Like reality right now is so bleak.
Right.
Okay. And I think anytime people can attach themselves to like any kind of positive emotion, right? Whether that's being like associated with a winner, they're going to want that, Yeah. Now, what you saw again during the McCourt era, right, was, and keep in mind, this wasn't anything they did. Like Manny Ramirez like fell out of the sky at some point, right? And all of a sudden, people feel good about the Dodgers, and kind of the heat backed off Frank a little bit.
Right.
Now, what happened though? Right after Manny gets popped and he's gone, and the team starts losing.
Yeah.
The Brian Stowe things happens, and now all of a sudden, this owner, I think, who kind of like again wasn't acknowledging the needs of the fans for a long time.
Brian Stowe thing, by the way, for anybody not familiar, Giants fan. Got in a fight or maybe was jumped by Dodgers fans in the parking lot and ended up in a coma.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
And that was a big deal at the time because Dodger fans too did have that reputation for being not too hospitable to visiting fans, especially Giant fans. So that was a big deal. But go on, sorry.
Yeah, so then like the fan base just kind of turned on him, right?
Right.
But I think it was kind of driven by the fact that they weren't winning anymore.
Right.
And all the kind of
bleak years.
Right. And then they start remembering kind of the bad things that happened previously. Yeah. And I think again, if they if they win forever, this is not going to be a problem, right? Now, if at some point though things start going bad, right? Yeah. They, obviously they just bought that same Mark Walter, right? Just purchased the Lakers. Yeah. Now these are all part of like a larger empire, right? I think the former CFO of the Dodgers is now running Fanatics, right? So there's kind of like a tie-in there, right? And Fanatics is now
really is the empire. Okay.
Right. The Fanatics is now like in the gambling space. And, and again, Guggenheim, it's a large investment company. They're kind of in everything. I imagine that as long as business is good and look, on the Ohtani contract, Ohtani has done them the single biggest favor. He's only getting paid $2 million a year. Wow. The other 68 is getting deferred until after he's like retired.
Right.
He's basically printing money for them. So, again, they messed up last year by signing Tyler Glasnow. What did they do? They just went out and they signed Blake Snell.
Right.
And both guys are hurt now, and you know what? They probably have enough money to go sign another guy.
And now Ben Kasparius and Justin Robleski are important cogs in this pitching staff.
They're good, man.
Well, and leading them to wins.
Right.
But hold on. So get back to this thing. Though. Mm-hmm. I want to hammer you on it because I think it was a service for the people of Los Angeles, and you were celebrated at least in a lot of circles for somebody. Not you personally, but journalists as a whole who get hammered and like her opinions are terrible and you're stupid and everybody could do that. But that was an important piece of journalism for you to come out for the people in Los Angeles. And a lot of people really celebrated you with your platform being one of the first high profile people to actually say this without mincing words about the Dodgers. What was the feedback you received from all walks, whether professional or personal, et cetera?
Professionally, it was overwhelmingly positive.
Okay.
Usually you write about something kind of political, it'll be 70-30 negative.
Yeah.
This time I was kind of surprised. It was probably like 65-35 positive.
Okay.
Okay. And then usually, right, the negative ones are like, go back to Mexico, that type of shit, right? It's like, they're very short, like kind
And
of.
by the way, for the record, Dylan is half Japanese, half Salvadorian, correct? Yeah. So there's a little bit of immigrant background. Welcome to LA, representative of Los Angeles. So you have a personal stake in this.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, isn't it just like offensive just watching what's happening right now? Like
around LA, absolutely.
Yeah, or just even kind of nationally, right? It's just kind of I guess what really kind of disappoints me and what upsets me is just kind of the dehumanization of people, right? Like, like if that was like really think about it, if that was like your mom, right? And I don't care like what background you're from. If your mom is just getting like ripped away from you and you might never see her again, like how, like, and the fact that people are just like, well, they shouldn't have been here illegally. Like, what the fuck, man?
You know what my wife says is all these people are like, illegal. You never do anything. There's nothing illegal in your whole, you followed every single law. You're in whole, but.
Well, again, and the other thing too, right, is like, again, maybe I'm going to get in trouble for this, whatever. But like what is it? So we have like 5% of the world's population and we consume about like a quarter of the world's natural resources. Wow. Right. And then like, look, you want to close the borders. Like, I'm not necessarily against that. It's just like close them both ways. Right, we shouldn't then be allowed to go into other countries, steal all their shit, and then like wonder like, whoa, why do people want to come here? Wow, right. Like we've kind of like taken away in a lot of countries. Right? We've propped up dictatorships. We've taken over the natural resources in so many countries. Right, we get upset at these communist regimes for popping up, but like that's kind of a response to what we had done already there. Right. And then like we wonder like, why do people want to come here? And again, to me, it's just like on a very, like, forget about all that stuff even. But again, these are like family, right? This is like think about it. It's like your dad, right? And the thing is that like, if you can't imagine that just because, right, the people look different than you, then that's just like, that is just like flat out racism, right? And look, I get it. Like I said, I do think reality is becoming like increasingly unbearable in this country or in Western. I think Western civilization, and this is a whole different conversation.
By the way, for the record, he's been a cynic cynic with a smile ever since I knew him. Well, before,
I said this was going to happen.
Yeah, true. He's been.
Right, but just the fact that like we can't even, right, and maybe the other way to look at it is that things are so bad now that everybody's just kind of, okay, I'm just going to look out for myself and fuck everybody else type thing. But that's kind of disappointing because I do think, the certain vision I think that we had of America, right, this isn't that, right? This is now it's just kind of we're all kind of, I feel like, right, a certain segment of society has kind of turned on everybody else and.
Yeah, and in LA specifically, like we are the world's great melting pot, in my opinion. Shout out New York, obviously, but I always say whether you're in Silmar, San Pedro, Wilmington, Woodland Hills, you have people of every persuasion, every socioeconomic class rubbing elbows. So, it's beautiful, and like essentially that's getting taken away from Los Angeles on a daily basis. Now, as far as the column, and then we'll move on from this. Mm-hmm. The Dodgers had a response, not necessarily to your column, but they were like, we're going to donate $1 million to something. I didn't even see what a specific foundation. They're going to help immigrant families or families of immigrants that have been affected. A, what's $1 million to the Dodgers? Right. Nothing, literally nothing. And B, what organization was it even to? And 3, were they like, all right, we did something. We're good to go now. That's our statement / action on everything that's affected all these families and all these people that are directly or indirectly related to our fan base. I mean, how is that a justification, or what is that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's just they just started kind of closing their eyes and I think just hoping this problem goes away, right? And obviously that day, or I guess it would have been the day before that announcement, right? ICE or immigrant, I guess it would have been Border Patrol vans, I guess, and there was a raid earlier that morning, and they took them to Dodger Stadium, hoping to use their parking lot to process them, and. The organization, to their credit, did turn them away.
Right.
So there was a line that...
And that is actually true. They did turn them away. It wasn't just like, oh, it's closed.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so that's good.
So they did turn them away. And so I think, again, like, I do think, though, a lot of people just, like, love this team so much, right? And the one thing about, it reminds me a lot of, like, I think a good example of this are, like, the fact that there's so many young Latino Raider fans in LA.
Yes.
And it's like, right, and you talk to, because I remember like when the Rams first came and the Raiders were playing a exhibition game at the Coliseum.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to these kids and I'm like, dude, the Raiders weren't even, like, you weren't even alive when they were last year.
Yeah.
Well, my dad was a Raider fan. My grandfather was a great Raider fan, right? And I think, especially like in Latino families, like fandom kind of gets passed down generation to generation. And so like, I think it's really hard for
Raider kid right here. I grew up a Raider fan. Absolutely. Okay, go on.
But I think it's just kind of hard to just like abandon that too, right? And like I think people were looking for reasons to either forgive the Dodgers or even praise the Dodgers, right? Because they love the Dodgers so much. And I do think that that's why that silence like bothered people so much. Is like it's more than just like. Again, right, because it's Fernando, it's right, Adrian Gonzalez, it's Julio Urias.
Look, since I've been doing LA in a minute, there's been nothing that's unified this city more than the Dodgers winning the World Series. I mean, that parade last year, which was on my son's birthday, was so beautiful, such a celebration, not just of the Dodgers, but of the city. And the Dodgers really did represent Los Angeles. Again, just walk through the stadium. You want to see a representation of Los Angeles. So their silence was indeed deafening. And let me ask you, have you seen an outpouring of support or even acknowledgement about the original land grab going back to the 50s and 60s? Is that related? Has that been sort of magnified and amplified a little bit? Or is that something that's kind of separate or pushed to the side still? Or what do you think about that?
I think for most of my time here, right, that's kind of viewed, right? I mean, obviously there's been, that was kind of like a city thing at the time. Yeah. Obviously the city councilors turned over God knows how many times. The team's been sold multiple times since they kind of took over, right? And I do think, right, and this is why Fernando Valenzuela is so important, is Fernando represented like a reset button of sorts, right? Okay, there was this ugly history here. This community distrusts this team, right? But now all of a sudden Fernando's here, right? Yeah. And, kind of like you mentioned, all of a sudden Dodger Stadium kind of became this place where I think everybody felt welcome, right? And again, with the, subsequent signings of guys like Nomo and Park and, right, the bringing in of all these Dominican players, that feeling that everybody's welcome there kind of really started to strengthen a bit. Now, I do think one of the there was this kind of time, right? Even in the last like 2 weeks or so, right? I mean, it's kind of ebbed and flowed. The emotions have, during this time. Yeah, I do think there was all of a sudden, it's like when they weren't saying anything and kind of after I wrote that column, I was getting a lot of the emails like, hey, well, why should this surprise you? This is the same team that like stole this land, even though it wasn't quite technically like that. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It kind of made it easier to kind of fuse these things all together. Now, I think at this point now it's still kind of right. And look, there still is an organization that kind of represents those people that were displaced at the time. And, those people are still obviously, I've heard from them too. Right. That said, I hear from them fairly regularly. Right. So to them, this issue has never gone away. Correct. But I do think, again, them kind of turning away, right, the Border Patrol at the gates and, at least giving some kind of, like you said, $1 million, it's kind of nothing. I think anybody with like half a brain kind of points out like, what are you talking about? It's like, right, that's not even probably like parking for like a game, right? Like, but
which goes in McCourt's pocket.
Well, they actually pay McCourt rent, right? So McCourt owns half of it technically, but they pay him like 11 or I can't remember the figure.
What a
Millionaire.
brilliant businessman that guy was.
So
didn't he put in $0? Wasn't it like zero of his money when he even bought the Dodgers? Wasn't it all like loans? And...
yeah, well, he had some land in Boston, right? And here's the thing, Frank McCourt, I'll say this about him, is the world just didn't move fast enough for him. Like everything that like he kind of envisioned eventually happened.
Really?
It happened 20 years too late, and he didn't have the money basically to kind of like wait that period out. Right. So again, that, he kind of pictured this development on that land that he owned in Boston. My understanding is like, there's like a whole new development out there.
Wow.
The Dodgers spring training complex out in Glendale.
Yeah.
Actually it's in Phoenix, but Glendale owns the land.
Yeah.
He was talking about
Camelback?
how he was, there was going to be all these development around it.
Yeah.
Obviously there was like a little dip in the Phoenix housing market.
Right.
So construction stopped for a while. Well, now, you kind of go down not too far from there. They're building this like man-made lagoon. It's going to be like a lake in the middle of, the desert.
Yeah.
Right, with a bunch of hotels.
Like
one of them,
Lake Travis in Austin kind of situation, if you will.
I don't know what that is.
Okay.
But anyway, there's going to be big hotels there, resort hotels.
Yeah.
One of them's got like a roller coaster coming through it. So like the thing just kind of happened.
So you're calling Frank McCourt a visionary?
Kind of. I mean, but he couldn't get himself there. Right, was the problem.
Right.
So,
but there's still something to be said about that.
Yeah.
All right. Let's backtrack because I want to get into you, Dylan Hernandez, the sports columnist / personality / our background. And I got to tell this story.
Oh boy.
Dylan was almost not in this industry. Probably would be working retail or still wrapping burritos potentially.
I was good at that.
To this day, if it weren't for my almost seismic mistake. This is how we met. And this is how Dylan was hired into this industry. I was working as an assistant sports editor for the Daily Bruin at UCLA. And Tracy Mack, who was with ESPN for a long time now, I forget what she's doing now. She's an exec in some kind of very successful, Tracy, if you're watching, much love. She was a sports editor. And it was during the summer where we hired the next year's sports writers. And this was the 90s where journalism was still big deal and print was still the thing because the internet was in its nascent stages. We get all these applications to write for the Daily Bruin. And our first walkthrough was like, okay, you read a couple writing samples, some standard questions. Is this a yes? Is this a no? Is this a maybe as far as who we're going to hire? And I'm reading this pack and we're putting them, it's late night. We're like going through all these applications. And I get this one. I'm like, this guy's a decent writer. Okay, decent, good writing sample. And the last page was like, write one article on like whatever you want. And everybody did NFL, Major League Baseball, UCLA sports. And this one writer did something on the WWF, which by the way is now known as the WWE, but World Wrestling Federation, it was called at the time. And I was like, immediate no. This guy thinks he's going to come and write for the nation's second best student newspaper, the Daily Bruin, and write about wrestling. No. And then Tracy Mack's like, Evan, you didn't even read it. You didn't even look at the writing sample. How can you say this guy's a good writer? And I was like, I don't want this guy coming in and thinks that to write about Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan and, Ric Flair, whatever, at the time. And it turns out that guy was Dylan Hernandez, who ended up being the most talented writer on that staff and having a quarter-century career thereafter. So it's even a wonder that we became friends.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy Mack.
Yeah, but if it was up to me, he would have never even been a journalist in the first place. So first of all, apologies on that for judging a book by, not its cover, by its last page. But still, that's how we met. But it turns out Dylan is an extremely talented writer, and that's what led to this career in Biloxi, in Boston, in San Jose, and now in Los Angeles. Tell us about that background. Why did you become a journalist in the first place? Where did that come from? And what made Dylan Hernandez Dylan Hernandez?
God, I don't know. I don't know. Like when I was a kid, I was playing soccer. I would hope that would,
Kid in South Pasadena, by the way.
Now, that said, I wasn't even the best player like in my own household, right? My younger brother was like a state pool Olympic development player or whatever.
Right.
So
shout out Esteves. By the way. Yeah.
I kind of realized, okay, like the chances here aren't very good.
Was he better than you from a young age? What age did he surpass you? What age?
Well, like because like my dad used to take us to Pomona to play like in like like these Spanish speaking leagues.
Yeah.
And so when we played on the same team, I was just bigger, obviously. But I mean, he was like,
what's your age difference?
2.
Okay.
But I mean, like when he played like rec, when he played like AYSO, he scored like 80, 90 goals a year. I mean, and he probably would have scored more if my dad hadn't like pulled him off. I mean, and even like the reason he was literally too good to play there because like the parents would just get like enraged.
I was gonna say because even when my son's in AYSO and a couple different seasons there's been that kid who scores like 5 goals in a half, and then when he comes out and scores that first goal in the second half, you're like, come on, like this kid can't be going. So go on. So that was your brother, okay?
Yeah. So I don't know. I started reading, I guess, at some point, reading books and stuff, and I kind of liked it because I was more math science because my mom's from Japan.
Okay.
She sent, and in the 80s, there were like a lot of Japanese business people here that would come over like on 3-year assignments. Right. And so there were these schools. I mean, I guess it still technically exists, but back then there were like, this chain of schools. Maybe there were like 15 around Southern California. And the schools, it wasn't like we're going to teach you Japanese. It was more for like, okay, if you come here like as a 3rd grader, we're going to drop you into a 3rd grade class. Yeah. It follows a curriculum over there. Right. And so that when you move back to Japan, you could just like slip right in. Okay. So I did that through middle school. And so I was more like of a math science person.
Was this the curriculum / school that you and Estebas were talking about in Bakersfield that was like the most rigorous,
it was terrible.
Hardcore, where you were telling me if you miss like one day, it's equivalent to missing like 3 weeks?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you're just and you never can catch up.
Yeah,
like, it's just, like, the workload is just like nuts, right? And so, because of that, I think I was more advanced in math and science.
Okay.
And, kind of the language part, right? I didn't really read too much, honestly, as a kid. Then I think at some point I started to, and, I remember particularly, right, reading like the autobiography of Malcolm X that I thought was really cool just because it was like, oh, like knowing stuff like is actually like useful, useful, so right? Awesome, and so I guess it was just kind of a fusion of like the two hobbies. There was this, so the big soccer league at the time, the club soccer league was down in Orange County called the Coast League. And so they had this kind of like monthly newspaper type thing that would go out, right? Some features on the teams, covered everything, colleges, pros and stuff.
That you were playing in this league at the time?
My brother was. I was already done.
Got it.
And so, it just seemed like that, right? And one day there was a job, a job listing type thing, like, hey, we're looking for writers.
Wow. And
so then I just decided, let me apply to that.
Wait. How old were you during this?
Like 15.
I didn't even read his application enough to know that this was part of his background. All right, go on.
And it so happened that the guy running it was like brilliant. Mr. Michael Jago. He lives in Chicago right now, but he went to, oh my God, he's going to get so mad if I get the school wrong. He went to Oxford. He had 2 doctorates.
Okay.
And like one of the smartest people like I've ever met, right? And it was just great just because like it was all of a sudden now I have like kind of this older person that I could like talk literature with. His wife taught at Santa Monica High School.
Okay.
And she was kind of Mrs. Jago was in charge of kind of like the English curriculum for the state of California.
Okay. Wow.
Right. So these are like super like, and
accomplished academics.
Yeah. And so, like I worked with him even when I was at the Daily Bruin. I kept writing for him on the side and stuff. And I would, he would take me out to dim sum.
But what got you started in writing? So what was it? It was just you were reading.
I was just reading a lot and I just kind of.
And you were like, I want to do this.
Yeah. And then like, obviously I was kind of like more math and science the whole time.
Yeah.
And so once I kind of started reading, like I started growing, like, right, my development was like very fast. Like I went from being like English being my least good subject to like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, like I might actually be pretty good at this. Now, what I wasn't counting on was that you eventually plateau, right? In retrospect, I should have stayed math science.
Right.
Like I'm definitely, like my brain definitely works better like that. So I just kind of ended up here, and then I wanted to. Right. And I think when we met, I was like really into boxing at the time.
Yes.
And I really wanted to be a boxing writer.
And my dad was a boxing manager, by the way. So once he got on staff, that's when we kind of sort of bonded and all this kind of stuff. My dad used to be a boxing manager, was a huge boxing fan throughout my even young adulthood. He'd host all the fights, pay-per-view stuff at his house. Friends would come over, his friends, my friends. But Dylan was one of the first boxing experts I knew of my contemporaries, right? And that was your real passion, right? That was your
I really wanted to be a boxer. So that's
what was it? The sweet science? What was it for you?
I admire the way fighters, especially at that era, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like chess, except it's like really scary,
right?
Like
Except you're getting punched in the face.
Right? Like I'm good, like at the mental part of things, right? Like if you put a puzzle in front of me, I think I can figure it out relatively quickly. Yeah. But again, I'm not getting punched in the face.
Yeah.
And kind of that balance, right? Of like kind of being able to think while under fire. Like I always just kind of like was very, like, I always admired that.
Hold on, real quick. I'm putting you on the spot. Give me your 5 top boxers, your top 5 boxers all time.
Duran.
Wow.
One for sure.
Manos de Piedra.
He's also a very underrated defensive fighter.
Okay.
Right? Because if not, like you would not be able to go from lightweight all the way up to like 168 or whatever he did and still be competitive. Everything Mayweather did going backwards, this guy did like while advancing. I think was incredible. Roy Jones is kind of like I think the most gifted. Yeah, I mean he's so funny story about Roy Jones. He's a really nice guy. Yeah. And so when I at some point, so when I moved to the Times, I started covering the Dodgers, right? Yeah. And then after 6, 7, 8 years, I became a columnist. And so now I get to cover whatever I want, right? So I'm starting to go to Vegas now to go cover fights. And one time, Roy Jones, I'm sitting at the bar, right at a table with like 6 other people. Roy Jones knows somebody at our table, so he comes to say hi. Roy's like a really nice guy, so he's going around the table shaking everybody's hand. Yeah. Now the thing is, he manages fighters.
I didn't even know.
Right,
that.
So I might have to, right? And not that necessarily that this would happen, but like, let's just say Roy Jones were to steal money from some like LA-based fighter. I have to write about him. Like I can't totally fanboy, right? Yeah. Like inside, I was like, oh my God, Roy, you're like my favorite fighter.
Yeah.
Instead, when he came over to shake my hand, I'm like, hey, nice to meet you. You used to like fight, right?
Wow, you went the total other way with it, huh? You
used to fight, right?
Some club fighter or something? Yeah. Okay, Duran, Jones, who else? Where's Tommy Hearns for you? I was a big Tommy Hearns guy, by the way. That Hearns versus Hagler fight, April 15th, 1985. Probably the best 3 rounds, most exciting 3 rounds ever that I've seen in an actual.
Well, you can't put him in the top 5, right?
Why not?
Because he lost to. Leonard got him.
Let's talk about Jones. Jones had some ignominious defeats at the end of his career.
Yeah, but they were at the end. I look at guys like at their peaks, right? Okay. Like what they did, like at their peak. You got to put Ray Robinson there, probably.
Okay.
Henry Armstrong.
Oh, you're going there.
Well,
let's take contemporary. Just give me one heavyweight. How about that? Best heavyweight. Modern.
Does Ali count, or is that not modern?
Ali counts, and he gets a special place, but more modern than that, though.
How you want me to say Tyson?
I don't necessarily want you to say Tyson, but
no. Look, I'll say this about because I think you're around kind of boxing people.
Yeah.
One guy who you should have on is do you know the name Bill Kaplan at all?
Yes, actually.
Yeah, he's still around. He
Manager, promoter, or something?
PR guy, yeah. He lives in the Valley. He actually saw like Ray Robinson fight.
Wow.
Right?
But, so
like Bill made like a list of his top 20 heavyweights and he put Tyson like 17. Right? And his argument was basically that Tyson, whenever somebody stood up to him, didn't like fight back, basically, right? Like Holyfield beat him and whatever. But like, I don't think Tyson was Tyson anymore.
Right.
In that sense, right? And I think that like how good you are affects like your confidence level.
Of course.
Of course. And I don't think like Holyfield would have no chance against like a prime Tyson.
Right.
No, he's definitely like a top 5 heavyweight. I think there's certain matchups that probably wouldn't have been great for him.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think Foreman destroyed Frazier.
Yeah.
So that probably would have been a tough matchup for him.
Hold on. So
I think he could have I think like he fights Ali. Styles make fights, right? I think he's competitive.
So what happened to boxing? Because again, when I was growing up, if there was a big fight, the world stopped. A big fight was the Super Bowl. And then all of a sudden, somewhere in the 90s, and then especially as we got in the 21st century, special occasion, sure, Canelo, now Cinco de Mayo kind of fight situation. But what the hell happened to boxing?
I think, from a commercial standpoint, I think it became too ethnic, right? And MMA, there was still like even into like the late 90s, early 2000s, you still had like your occasional Arturo Gatti.
Right.
Right. Whereas like now they're like no, like literally none white American born fighters.
Really?
Right? I guess Gotti's technically Canadian.
Yeah.
Whatever, right. And that's what coincided with kind of the emergence of MMA, which kind of gave, fight fans kind of you want to see like a white guy
Was MMA
competitive, that will do it. Right. And that's why it kind of became right through, I would say it's probably around like starting 2000, right? It became like a very, the fan base became overwhelmingly Latin. That's who's been carrying this.
But even still, let's go back.
Now I think what's happened at the same time, you saw like a decline in the actual skill, right? One thing that I was going to mention about, like, for example, like if you know nothing about baseball,
and
you saw Barry Bonds like hit the ball into the water, Barry Bonds is good, right? You don't have to know anything about boxing, for example, to say like, oh, like Manny Pacquiao's like, he's a good fighter, right?
Roy
like,
Jones.
Now I could, I was kind of like a Pacquiao critic of sorts, well, he leads with his face and I don't like the way his feet are lined up and whatever, but that's being nitpicky, right? But like, you can see he's good. I just remember years ago, I was with Ryan Karchi, our USC writer. And we had just gone to cover a game somewhere. And afterwards we're at dinner. And this was when Top Rank had their deal with ESPN. So Tyson Fury's fighting. And so I just put the phone there, right? At the edge of the table while we were eating and we're kind of watching the fight. And Ryan asked me, is this guy good? Right. And that to me is what this is about. It's just kind of like, you can't just tell.
No,
right?
Man.
Like the fact that people have to tell you that this is entertaining or not or whatever. And part of this is, I think, because of the brain damage issue, right? Fighters only spar 3 times a week now.
Right.
They used to spar 6 times a week. So who's going to be better? The guy that spars 6 times or the guy that's right? So they're literally practicing their actual craft half as much. But then there's also obviously kind of the talent drain, right? And like in the 70s,
going to other sports.
In the 70s, right? The highest paid guys in the world were boxers, right? You're a heavyweight boxer. That's how you become rich. Now an NFL lineman, right? You look at like just, again, I don't know if he would have the heart to necessarily be a great fighter. But like you look at a guy like LeBron, I mean, he's got reach, he's got great feet, he's strong, he's got everything. Like at least
I've actually seen that somewhere. Was that from you who put that out there? Like, what if LeBron was a boxer?
Yeah, like, right. I mean, the guy that I always thought would have been tremendous was like Allen Iverson.
Oh, wow.
Because you don't have to question the heart there even, right? And for his feet were like super fast and he was playing at what, like 175? You drain him.
160, I think 160.
I mean, you drain him, you could get him down like welterweight. Who's going to beat that guy?
True.
Right?
True.
So I just think they stopped getting the athletes. And it's kind of like, okay, we're at a point now where you can't even tell, right? Just a couple nights ago, one of the Paul brothers fought Chavez Jr.
Yeah, I saw it. It's such a joke,
right?
Though.
But the thing is that the fact that people aren't going to be like, oh, let me save money for the real fight. Let me go spend it on this. Tells you that, like, from a visual standpoint, it's really not that different. I just think the fighters are just bad. Because I don't care anymore. I don't get the Zone anymore.
Oh, wow.
I don't get HBO dropped boxing a while ago. So did Showtime, right? I just don't watch it now.
And this is even with Jim Lampley making a comeback. Huh?
Yeah, right. and right. I mean, that's a problem. Like the fact that they're promoting
Jim Lampley, the announcer, by the way.
No, and he's really good.
Like the biggest boxing story that I followed in the last year.
Right. And that's the thing. The fact that like that's like a story. Right. The fact that like Tyson is still the biggest. Like literally, that was the biggest draw last year was Tyson Paul. The fact that Tyson.
I mean, I'll watch Mike Tyson fucking.
Well, I know, but like if we
do standards.
Right, but if you had if you dragged out Oral Hershiser to the mound, like that's not going to sell out Dodger Stadium.
Although that new Oral Hershiser commercial where he's like a hockey goalie or something, like that's actually pretty intriguing. I want to pivot right here. You are a print journalist in an era where print is becoming, which has become outdated and irrelevant.
Yes.
And the LA Times is trying their best, to embrace the modern landscape. What are your overall thoughts as the paper keeps getting smaller, coverage keeps getting more narrow, and frankly, and it pains me to say this, the LA Times is becoming more irrelevant through no fault of your own, and maybe
it is my fault.
So what do you think about that? And where does that stand? What is the future of the LA Times and journalism as a whole?
Yeah, I think we're just kind of stuck between places, right? I think the majority of our revenue still actually comes from like print, in some form.
Okay.
And obviously we still have, I don't, you're going to have to look this up, whatever. But we have a decent number of like print subscribers,
Right.
depending on how you describe decent.
Right.
But we still have, obviously, these very loyal print subscribers. I want to thank every one of you still for continuing
You're
to get
welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I really do appreciate that. I mean,
Yeah.
those are the people we work for, And now I think we understand too that that's, like you said, right? The people that kind of need to have the print product at their breakfast table every morning with their coffee,
Absolutely.
right? Those numbers are diminishing. And, so we have been kind of making efforts of sorts to kind of transition more into this like digital world. I just think that, so you run into like multiple problems here, right? Like one is kind of like, from like a journalism standpoint, a lot of times kind of the more digital minded people aren't, because we talked about earlier, right? The part of journalism is kind of the talking to everybody thing, right? Asking the uncomfortable questions. So that's kind of like from the reporting standpoint, but from like an editing standpoint, right? There are certain questions that our editors need to ask us when we file stuff, right? And you kind of go, the people that kind of know the digital landscape,
right?
A lot of times I found don't necessarily have like the journalistic background.
Absolutely. It's almost separate. It's almost bifurcated.
Right. Yeah. And then kind of the people that are kind of solid on the journalism, right, still get the paper. Like, and even though like I'm not, relatively speaking, that old, I'm going to be 45 in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm still, I think, kind of on the younger side. Like I'm kind of a dinosaur though.
Right.
Like I'm still like, I still read stuff. I don't listen to a bunch of podcasts.
Right.
My kids recently kind of got me on TikTok.
All right.
But so I don't really get that space myself.
Yeah.
Right. And so the people, because I think to really understand that space, you need to be living that space. Right. And kind of like, right. And it's your experience as a consumer that's going to tell you, okay, this is where the people are. Let's go to them. But we are not in a position, obviously, to kind of like hand the keys over to like a 25-year-old kid who hasn't done anything in this business yet or kind of had the experience to, kind of understand situations, right? Because so much of, again, I think I've kind of reached a point, in my, age-wise where, a lot of the younger reporters come to ask me for advice.
Yeah.
And, when I talk to them, I sound like, very like sure of myself, I'm sure. But the truth is, I know these things because I messed everything up every possible way, right? And it's through trial and error that after a while, right? And then I start putting that
the luxury to learn,
right? And and now I start putting that together with things that people like T.J. Simers or Bill Plaschke, right?
Yeah,
told me, and it's like, oh, this is what they meant by this. Right. It doesn't just become like this slogan. Now I understand what this actually means.
Right.
And so that's kind of one of the issues we have. There's an infrastructure problem, I think. I do think, our current owner, Patrick Soonshang, when he bought the paper, initially, built podcast studios in our building.
In your El Segundo building?
In our El Segundo building.
Okay. So, which I think, by the way, for the record, if you haven't heard, I think was a major problem moving the headquarters down to El Segundo. Yeah. Ripping the heart out of downtown LA. How do you not cover Los Angeles from Los Angeles? And all respect to El Segundo, very important, awesome area, neighborhood, community, but it's way the hell down there, and you're going to have the LA Times based in El Segundo.
So this happened under previous ownership, right? They sold the building.
But they Soonshang moved to El Segundo, correct?
Right, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But a lot of our issues right now kind of stem from things from like the previous ownership where they sold stuff.
Was it Trunk?
Trunk, yeah. They sold like our printing presses, right? So right now we are being printed, I believe, by like the LA Daily News Group, right? And so
Southern California
News Group.
Wow.
Yeah. And so now we have like very early deadlines, right? Which is why
I've seen it.
We cannot get the scores of a game that happened right in the next day's
Allow
newspaper.
me to say this. Sorry, Dylan, but this is why I subscribe to the LA Times and the Daily News, because in those mornings when I'm having breakfast and drinking my coffee, I go to the Daily News first on the sports section because I can actually see the recap of the Dodger game or the Laker game or whatever it is, whereas the LA Times typically has the recap from 2 days ago, which by that point is fish wrap, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big problem.
Right. So, I think, as columnists, right, I think Plaschke and I have made conscious efforts to write things that aren't necessarily like attached to like an event
yesterday.
Right. Yeah. You know, but these things, again, there were a lot of mistakes, I think, or maybe they weren't mistakes because they were done intentionally, right? By kind of these greedy people that would kind of buy us, like, right. And these would be like leveraged purchases, whatever. And then all of a sudden we assume the debt that, like Sam Zell, whatever, right? His debt became like our debt. And next thing you know, even though we were making money still at that time, I believe like we were running at a deficit because we had to pay off his debt. So yeah, it's, but again, I think that there's, right, then COVID hit after we built all these podcasts. I think there was a plan. So me, Bill Plaschke, and Jack Harris, our Dodgers beat guy. Yeah. We do like a weekly video. Okay. Right. It's called Dodgers Debate. It's been fairly well received. Right. And when we can, right, when the team's at home, right, and Jack's not on the road, we actually go to the office in El Segundo, and we do have a set there. Right. Now, this thing started. Andy McCullough was the beat guy. So probably
he was good writer,
great writer,
great writer.
Yeah. So we're probably talking about 10 years ago. We started doing these videos post game, right? And it took until this year to finally make it a weekly feature, right? And I think one kind of issue that we have, and I'm not going to criticize management from the standpoint that I don't really know what happens in there. You've known me for a long time. I am not a management type. Right. I will never go into management. So I have no idea the pressures that they're under or anything, but it's just that, because of the size of the company, things move very slowly. Right. Right. Maybe one good example I guess I could use is the fact that say whether it's like our laptops that we're given, it's not just like, okay, I need a new laptop and they're going to get me like a brand new one. It's like, once you kind of are in the process of replacing laptops, it's like you got to do it for like all 400 reporters at a time. So even the turnover in technology is very kind of slow, right? Right. And I kind of feel that with a lot of ideas, they kind of wind up dying on the vine because it's just hard to move, right? And that's kind of the biggest issue I think that we have is that, honestly, right? And I'm not just saying this because I'm on here, but like, in an ideal world, I think at some point, right, when you were just starting out, right, like we would have hired you to do your thing and kind of become a thing, right? But like, it just feels like everything takes like a long time, right? Right, it's right. We're too
can't be nimble,
right? In one way, we're like too big, and in other ways, So it's tough right now. I think, look, the LA Times, it is a brand, correct? Right? I don't think people like in Tokyo understand what the physical paper actually looks like, right? When people find out, when I was in Tokyo earlier this year, people found out I was with the LA Times. Yeah, it was like, oh my God, you're with the LA Times, right? So I do think that brand name has some value. We're going to exist in some form. Of course, it's just kind of like, well, in what form are we going to kind of exist, and what's going to be kind of our purpose? And
can I make an analogy?
Go ahead.
What about Playboy? I almost see you going down the same path as Playboy, where it's a huge brand, it's a valuable brand, but it's an irrelevant brand.
Yeah. And I think, we have like our annual, to that point, right? We do try to kind of maximize, the festival of books that we do every year, right? It's a big event. Solid. The annual food festival.
Solid. Food bowl.
Right. Right. And we're trying to kind of create.
But that becomes, again, that's a different sort of organization at that point, right? You're not the LA Times, you're a media organization, which I think is kind of, which I do think is kind of necessary, right? But again, even when it comes to creating new stuff, right? God, it must have been like 10 years ago. There were ideas being thrown around about like, why don't we send you and Plaschke out to like a bar and talk like this in front of people and kind of like interact with people and just get them kind of more immersed with like our brand, so to speak. And it just like, it just never happened, right? It was an idea that got talked about, right? It got to the point where like I was asked about like, what do you think? And I'd be like, yeah, sure. And then you just don't hear from it again. Because there's too many layers.
Right. And there are too many things that just kind of happen to, we just went through like another round of buyouts, last year we had layoffs and buyouts, and so that's the thing is like, you can even kind of set this plan and, cause I probably shouldn't talk about this, but there have been some things, let's just say that like, we were planning to like launch, and then it's like, oh yeah, those people the people that would have like executed this like don't work here anymore. Like things like that happen.
So a couple good projects, just to not continue denouncing the LA Times on my side. 404 is decent. Tom Carroll does a great job. Delos was a very promising project. I don't know what the proper terminology is, but there are some forward-looking things that the LA Times did and they executed that they did with varying levels of success, but they didn't seem to back it with the resources that would have ensured that it continued to grow. And again, you don't have that insight from the boardroom, from the corporate level, but these are things that the New York Times is doing and continues to do, and that's why they grow and thrive and profit. And the LA Times almost seems to be chasing its tail a little bit. Is that fair to say? Where,
yeah, you know, I think.
I don't want to put you in too.
No. I mean, no, because these are all like fair questions, right?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, these are questions like we ask ourselves, right? I mean, whatever you're asking here, look, because the truth is that if we don't at least become like revenue neutral at some point, right? You know, we're not going to exist anymore. Like, I'm not going to have a job
except
at the LA Times.
brand where somebody's going to buy the LA Times name and make it whatever the hell they want.
Correct.
Instead of it being this shining beacon of journalism and
So I think, you know, and look, there with a lot of things, again, there are various reasons, like things, you know, plugs got pulled on certain things. There's certain projects that kind of started. And like you said, we maybe didn't like see it all the way through. You know, I'm sure ownership has, I mean, look, like whatever criticisms there are of Patrick, right? And some of them are fair, right? He did, to his credit, when he first came in, poured in like a lot of money. And
I thought his heart was in the right place,
you know,
at least initially.
You know, you can kind of question if we used it wisely.
I
guess is one way to put it. You know, and so like, look, like I understand like it's his reluctance to kind of pour more into it, right? And
it's a money pit.
You know,
That's all it is.
You know, and a lot of it too comes down to, again, it's tough kind of to find somebody that can kind of do everything, right? I mean, I let me give you an example of something that has gone right. Right? It's like Jack Harris. Right. Jack Harris,
great writer,
is our Dodger writer. We had him first as an intern. We kind of kept him on, and you know he's a really good writer. He covers games well. He stays on top of the news. He, you know, any kind of like topical thing, any kind of trends that go on, like he somehow finds the time to kind of write features about these things. You know, he's a great resource, obviously, for me and Plashke. Where the truth is, like columnists, we can't possibly know everything that's going on, right? And so I show up to the Dodgers and I haven't been around the team for a week. I have, you know, like I'll tell Jack like, well, I'm thinking about something like this. Like, you know, I have to kind of run it by him. He's the quarterback of the team, right? On top of that, he's really good on video, right? He's good on Twitter. He kind of does everything. And those are the types of people that we need, right? Now the problem is like, usually people like that cost a lot of money. Right.
And there's not that many.
They're not that many
people is the problem.
Right. And, you know, look, and if Jack continues on this trajectory, he's going to have probably options to make a lot more money soon, you know? And so then we have to kind of,
Andy McCulloch's.
Then we have to decide, okay, are we going to pay to kind of keep him? Right. We might. Right. Or do we just kind of, where do we, but the money's going to have to come out of somewhere. Right. And it's just kind of hard to, you know, and then again, you kind of find, you know, again, there's a lot of kind of the institutional knowledge that we've like lost over time. You know, right. You know, last year, Mike DiGiovanna, who covered the Angels for 20 years, took a buyout. And, you know, right. He wasn't on the beat anymore at this point. He's kind of like the fourth or fifth.
Somebody big name recently took a buyout too, or left. Who was it? Who's the most recent to leave from the sports section?
Let's see. It was David Wharton.
Wharton left?
Wharton left.
The business guy.
He was
sports business. Yeah. I didn't even know that.
Wharton,
that's who it was.
Nathan Fenno. And again, like those are.
Wait. So what's the future hold for Dylan Hernandez?
I really like my job right now.
Okay.
You know, I am not, and I've said this to like probably like my financial detriment, but I've, let it known to the company, look, I don't have any intention of leaving at this point because look, my family's from here. My parents live like a mile from where I live. They're basically raising my children.
Right.
But yeah, like you're kind of starting to, and again, we're in the process of renegotiating like our union contract, which is also kind of a tricky situation because it's kind of like
public. It's so public too.
Yeah.
Like
and again, I get it, right? We're not a profitable industry yet. At the same time, it's like, well, if it's going to cost like $60 for a family of 4 to go to McDonald's, right? We also need some money to like live, and so these are kind of like complicated situations that you're kind of like. We really don't know. That's the thing is if I had all the answers to this question, I'd be running the paper. And I'd be a hero for having salvaged the whole thing.
Okay. We're sort of running out of time, so I want to wrap it up, but I want to get a couple speed round questions going. All right?
Okay.
First and foremost, Shohei Ohtani. Now, you were, again, speaking Japanese fluently. When he came to the Angels initially, you were like special projects on top of Ohtani, right? You did a lot of report. It wasn't framed that way, but from my perspective, following your career and
so the year before he came here, right? We kind of got like there were strong signals that he was going to come that off season. So actually, in 2017, his last year in Japan, I went to Japan and kind of followed him for a week, and I visited his high school.
Yeah.
Right, and I saw him play a couple games in Tokyo, and saw him play in Hokkaido, where his team was based.
Right.
So
what did that do for your career? What did that do for your relationship with both Ohtani and now the Dodger organization? Or I guess at the time the Angel organization, but
Dodgers.
Angels/Dodgers.
He's I've never seen like an athlete like that like shut off, I guess, from there's a clear distance.
Even in Japan.
Even in Japan. I don't think anybody really knows him.
And you've never seen that?
Not to this degree, no. Like, because at some point, there's always, they always let like somebody in, right? And most of the Japanese players especially, what's kind of interesting, right, is like, when I first got here, I think Takashi Saito was here. Yeah. Kuroda came.
Good call.
Right, Darvish. And kind of at some point, I think they usually kind of need me in some way. Yeah. Right? Like, just kind of like, why is that guy mad at that guy even? Or am I going to get traded? Or something like that, right? In Darvish's case, actually, our relationship more grew after he left, and the sign stealing thing came up.
Oh, wow.
Right? And he actually reached out to me and was like, hey, I want to say something to the fans of LA. Would you mind putting this, doing something with me? But Ohtani's been kind of in this, like, he kind of knows where he wants to go. And I don't think anybody like really knows him, right? Which is why this whole gambling thing was so kind of weird because everything, look, unless this has been like an ongoing problem for, his whole life, basically. Yeah. Like, look, when I went in 2017, everything tracks, okay? I have never seen anything that would contradict the story that they gave. As unbelievable as it may sound, right? Right. That somehow like $20 million disappears from his bank account that he didn't notice. Yeah. But like, let me tell you this story, because when I went to Japan in 2017, I talked to his high school coach who told me, so the teams in Japan, they have one minor league team and they practice with the big league team. Wow. It's just on game day that they split apart. Now they have dorms for like the first and second year players there, right? And so it's mostly minor leaguers and stuff, but like rookies kind of stay there. You stay there for about 2 years and then like you leave. Wow. Ohtani never left the dorms, right? Because his thing was like, look, they feed me 3 times a day. Yeah. If I want to practice and we're off, I can just walk outside in the batting cage that are right there. Like, why would I ever leave? Yeah, like Kobe asked. And his mom evidently was so concerned, ironically, that he would grow up financially illiterate, that she opened a checking account for him, a special checking account, because his check was getting direct deposited into his parents' account. Okay. So she opened a special checking account for him and evidently deposited $1,000 a month in there every month. So just so he would have money. Okay. After a year, she checks it. The amount had actually increased because it had like accrued interest, and he had never touched it. So if you ask me, right, the one thing they found, right, that the feds found was that he had never logged into his bank account via his phone. And so if you ask me, like, you know what I mean? Like, to me, like, it kind of tracks, right? Like, I remember when we first kind of got the tip that this was going on, right? Now, we didn't know that the interpreter was involved or anything. It's just all we know that there were wire transfers in Ohtani's name, right, to like a bookie, whatever.
Yeah.
And evidently, like, they were like, I just remember being told by somebody over like on our news site, like, hey, evidently, like, he bet like a lot on soccer. And what I just remember was like, I don't know. This doesn't sound right because the year before, so the Galaxy signed this player named Maya Yoshida, who was the captain of Japan's World Cup team, the previous World Cup. Okay. So after they sign him, he goes to throw out the first pitch in Anaheim.
Okay.
And Ohtani just like, usually if it's like a big guy or something, he'll stop to say hello and bow and all that kind of stuff, right? And like, he just walked by the guy.
Really?
And I think, my theory, right? I mean, and the Japanese media watches all this stuff, by the way. Right. So they're all kind of cackling like, oh, he disrespected him. And I was like, dude, I bet you he has no idea who the fuck that guy is. Wow. Right? And so you're telling me that a guy...
He's so myopic, because he's so dead, because he's... Okay.
Yeah, and so like you're telling me that a guy who can't recognize the captain of his country's national team is like betting that much on soccer? I mean, I guess it's possible, but like, now that said, like, I don't know, right? Like, I've never talked to him, and look, knowing a guy doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be right about it, right? Sally Jenkins defended Lance Armstrong all the way. Wow. Oh, she's going to kill me. But, right?
Great journalist.
Right? Yeah. Who was the Paterno guy? Some guy wrote a Paterno book. It ruined his career, actually.
Don't know.
But anyway, sometimes you kind of get duped by like knowing a guy, right? Yeah. But like here, I don't think anybody had any real feel for what was going on. Wow. But it kind of speaks to this because, and he's so perfect. Yeah. Like his diction is like pretty crazy, right? Like I remember telling Japanese reporters, like, I don't know if it's because, so my Japanese education ended like in the 9th grade.
Right.
But like every now and then, like I have to like look up in the dictionaries, like words that he said, because I don't know what they mean. And they're like, oh no, that's like with us too. Like we have to look it up too. Right.
Wow.
Like, yeah. So it's almost like he's very well spoken. He's polite. He's very like
a robot.
Yeah. Well, except like there's like, he smiles enough, right, to like feel like human.
Disarm you a little
right.
bit.
Yeah. Like, his teammates all like him. Like, that said, I don't think anybody right. The fact that like nobody knew that he had gotten married.
Wow.
Right.
Good point.
Good
point. Everybody.
Yeah. Now that's not too uncommon, by the way, in that culture. Kind of your private life is kind of your private life, whatever. But like,
and the dog.
Yeah. It's so. Yeah. So I don't think we have like a good feel for who this guy is, and I know, like me personally, somebody had talked to me about maybe writing an Ohtani book. I have friends that have also been approached about writing Ohtani books. Now, there have been some that have been written, but it all kind of comes down to the same thing. Like, I think the reason I refused it, and the reason like some of my friends have refused them, is because it's kind of like, what are these books supposed to be about? It's like, who is this guy? And ultimately, these books would all wind up being like, well, I tried to find out who he was, and I still don't know who he is, right? Like, what's the point of writing that?
Okay, all that said, is he the greatest player you've ever seen?
Oof, I still got to go Bonds. I mean, Bonds was, look, I don't know if you can kind of compare them, right? I mean, because obviously, like, Bonds couldn't pitch.
Right.
And this guy was just throwing 102 the other day.
Yeah,
that's and it looks,
it's insane.
The fact that, my favorite thing about this too is like, all like American teams, when he was coming out of high school, saw him as a pitcher.
Yeah.
Right. The Dodgers, if they had signed him out of high school, he would not have been hitting. He was just going to be a pitcher. Wow. All the Japanese teams thought he was a better hitter. Okay. And the fact that this like argument has kind of persisted, and even to this day, it's kind of like, well, which one is he better at? I mean, I think right now the hitting numbers, right, kind of outweigh the pitching
50-50.
numbers. But that said, right, if this guy comes out and wins a Cy Young next year, like, would you be surprised? No, right? Like, and he might still be a better pitcher.
Wow.
So from that standpoint, there's nothing like this, obviously.
Right.
That said, like, Bonds was just like, you just threw it in the strike zone, like he was
greatest player in my lifetime. Yeah. And again, Ohtani's right there, and probably within 2 years, I'm going to have a different answer. But yes, agree with Bonds. Okay, real quick talk on the Lakers. Mark Walter, your buddy, just bought the Lakers. What are your overall thoughts on the organization, that transaction, Jeannie Buss, the Buss family, where that leaves everybody, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it's probably time for this, right? I mean, I just think in sports in general, family ownership family ownership is kind of a thing of the past.
That's
you
crazy, right?
Because you need to be funded well enough to kind of deal with kind of the ups and downs.
Billions upon billions.
Yeah, you know, I mean, right, with the Dodgers, like the O'Malleys, as much as you kind of yearn for that era again and kind of the intimacy of it, right? As you know, even though the Lakers are a global brand, they've been kind of run like a mom and pop shop. True. It's a very small organization, you know, and right, they don't have like the biggest. I mean, they have like one of the smallest scouting departments, right? They don't have much of an analytics department, right. So they've been behind like in a lot of ways. You know, from a winning standpoint, I think it's going to be good. I do think, you know, but that's the thing, right? It's like, you know, with the things that kind of happen in the community. I will say this about, you know, and I've been very critical of Jeannie over the years. Right. Okay. You know, I remember a wise man once told me, never trust a person who didn't make their own money. Right.
Wow. Okay. Fair.
Not to be too, you know, but, you know, so I do kind of question like her capabilities as like a steward, but like she did care about LA. She was from LA. Absolutely. She's at every game. She sits courtside at every game. She talks to the fans.
She's legit.
Every game.
I love Jeannie Buss. Jeannie Buss sat in that very chair when she was on the podcast, so be careful. But go on.
You know, so I think you're going to kind of miss that like intimacy, right? That you had with like kind of the owners of the team.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're going to go into this era where it's going to be owned now by a guy that, again, who, despite having one of his teams having an overwhelmingly Latino fan base, decided to kind of stay quiet during this, right? And sometimes you kind of feel that distance of the absentee owner, right? So there's going to be good for it. There's going to be some good. I'm going to guess they're going to win, which is going to be the good part. But maybe you kind of miss the kind of familial feel that the Lakers inspired for.
Which is what the modern Lakers were built on. Showtime, which again was Magic Cream, worthy all the players, but was like the Buss family, right? Which is something that the people in LA identify with. But again, winning trumps all, so there it is.
Well, maybe they finally get out of that crypto. That thing's a piece of crap, by the way.
The Crypto.com arena?
This place is terrible.
Why do you say that?
It was never a great arena, and it hasn't aged
doesn't have a soul.
And then I don't know if you've been to, you know, I mean, the location is problematic with the with Ballmer's building in Inglewood. I think. Yeah, I mean they had one of the lowest attendances in the NBA this year.
But it's because the Clippers, they should have rebranded the team while they were doing everything else. They should have just got rid of the Clippers name.
Again, I think moving that far out of downtown maybe was kind of. I mean, it's a magnificent arena, right? I mean, I would put it up there. I love SoFi, and to me, this thing like rivals SoFi as much as a basketball arena can, right? Okay. You know, but I think kind of I don't know if you know this, but like kind of in this like panic move, they created this like weird club. At Crypto?
No.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I guess it's part of like the premium seat. It's kind of like the equivalent of like the Diamond Club for the Dodgers. But it's just like, I don't know, they just like jam this thing in and kind of like the back end of the arena. And maybe I'm just biased because it cut into the media workroom. But it looks like this like dungeon from the outside. It's just, I don't know. It just seems so desperate.
Interesting.
You know?
Fair enough.
I think they need to kind of get...
and then the Kings too, though, are there.
Yeah, and so the Anschutz owns, right? AEG owns both the team and the arena. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see where they go.
Lakers aren't moving.
No, I don't think they're going to move. But maybe they can like really renovate the place maybe, or I don't know what the choices are.
Okay, most popular teams. When you write a story, rank the hierarchy of LA sports teams.
Dodgers, Lakers, USC football.
Wow. Okay, top 3, and then it's a fall off.
And then it's a cliff.
Where are the Rams?
Not good.
Really?
Yeah.
Chargers, no offense to our today's producer, John Na, are very far down that hierarchy. That I know.
Yeah.
UCLA football, very far down that hierarchy.
UCLA basketball. I mean, I'll say they do pretty well. Even UCLA football does okay.
Really? Okay.
I would say that is a credit to our beat guy, Ben Bulge, who does a very good...
Great writer.
Right. He does.
Shout out,
right.
Ben Bulge.
And Ben is pretty like old school in terms of, you know, I think especially right now, the camera phones have changed the way we interact with people a lot, right?
Yeah.
Because now all of a sudden you start getting into like a back and forth. I do remember when people started posting stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
So Don Mattingly and I actually liked each other.
Don Mattingly, my favorite player growing up,
he was
along with Kirby Puckett.
So he was the manager of the Dodgers.
Yeah.
Now, you might not necessarily be able to tell if you saw us interact because I would be like, what, are you lying to us again? You know, and like, right? So we would go back and forth like that. And one of these things got kind of posted on YouTube and my brother saw it, right? And he calls me and he goes like, why are you such a dick? but it's kind of like, you know how like when comedians kind of talk about if you're not there, you kind of don't understand the context of the joke.
Of course.
So there's like a lot of that happens, I think, right? And if it gets put on camera, all of a sudden it just seems different.
Yeah, the context.
And so I think it's made a lot of like, especially younger reporters, kind of reluctant to ask the question that has to be asked kind of directly.
Wow.
And one thing I really admire about Ben is that he's one of the guys that like asks that question, right? It doesn't matter how uncomfortable it gets.
Yeah.
You know, and for years I thought like one of the most entertaining things in our paper was just like he and Chip Kelly did not get along, and them going back and forth and him putting Chip's feet to the fire, and you know, and the way that relationship kind of ebbed and flowed and evolved, I thought was like really
compelling.
Yeah,
makes it
right?
compelling.
You kind of see the person behind it. So anyway, I think a lot of our UCLA traffic, especially the basketball, does very well, or relatively well. I think a lot of that is a credit to Ben as much as it is to.
What about LAFC, Galaxy?
Yeah, soccer doesn't do great for us. You know, there are places where I think, right, people get used to going to certain places for certain things.
Yeah.
Right. You know, and there are probably some more soccer-centric publications that, those fans, right? Because it's a newer fan.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm not necessarily sure that they were ever like in the habit of like visiting the LA Times. Right.
What about Kings and Ducks?
God, I mean, honestly, like, you know, we've had to make decisions now, right? In terms of like travel budget, like what we're covering, what we're not covering. You know, we have not had a full-time person on the Angels in a couple of years now, which would have been unthinkable at some point.
Wow. Yeah.
But
I see you pull wire for Angels
games. That's kind of our financial reality right now, right? I don't think anybody likes it. Even the people making these decisions, you know, I know they take a lot of criticism, like, oh, how can, you know, this editor decide like we're not covering this anymore? But like, well, we have so many people and we have so much money, and that's the reality. That's the reality.
Okay, so for Dylan Hernandez, sports aside, what are your favorite parts of LA? Where do you like to hang out?
I mean, I kind of feel like there's like the city's divided into like certain quadrants that you don't leave unless you have to.
Okay.
So I'm out in Pasadena. I do not leave that area if I don't have to.
All right.
I mean, I always joke with my brother because my brother lives in the valley, right?
Yeah, hell yeah.
I always tell him that if he lived in San Diego, I'd probably see him more than I do. I mean, that was the great part about actually, right, having our kids all play together was the fact that like I saw, you know, my son and his cousin got very close over this past year, which was great. Yeah. But I don't really leave Pasadena too much. And I got 2 kids, man. I'm not cool. Like, I don't know. People ask me like, where do you go eat in Pasadena? It's like, I don't know. Like the pizzeria down the street. Like,
what's the pizzeria down the street though? Where do you
Mama's. Go? Well, I used to like the luggage room, which was attached to La Grande Ranch. And I believe, edit this out if it's not true, but I believe that they closed, or they are closing for good. The original restaurant is actually out in Phoenix. So I used to go there during spring
in March.
And closed in March.
Yeah. Oh, were they the La Grande Ranch? They were affiliated with
Yes.
I used to like La Grande Ranch.
Yeah, so the original La Grande Ranch. The original La Grande Ranch is in Phoenix, out in the
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Out by that Biltmore area, whatever. And so I first had their stuff there, and then I knew, right, this place opened up here.
Wow.
So that was like one of but then they stopped doing takeout.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't want to take my kids to like a pizza.
You're more a homebody.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
King Taco.
Okay, there we go. Classic.
We did that last night.
Raul Martinez, by the way, invented the modern food truck prior to Roy Choi, prior to the food truck craze. He was cooking carne asada in MacArthur Park. People would line up, try to buy tacos from him. He had this crazy idea to retrofit a ice cream truck and sell tacos, and people thought he was crazy. But lo and behold, it took him 6 months to sell tacos out of the truck, to open his first brick and mortar, and then the King Taco Empire was born. So,
and I guess the secret on this one's kind of already out of the bag, but there's it's kind of this small fish market in San Gabriel, Yama.
Ooh.
And so I've been going there since I was like a little kid, right?
Yeah.
And you know, now because thanks to like Yelp and stuff, people have discovered that the sushi there is delicious. So now they're like huge lines now.
Really?
Yeah, like Greg Beecham of the Associated Press.
Yeah.
I ran into him there, and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing here?
Yeah.
Right? But like, so it's not a secret anymore.
Wait,
but like,
Yama. Y-A-M-A?
Yeah. And I think they just opened they They just opened one out on the west side. I think they opened one in Santa Monica recently too. But it came under new ownership a few years ago. So I knew Mr. Yama like from the time I was like a little kid. Actually, Yama Sushi was one time. So quick side here about the Japanese school, right? So this thing was run like a Japanese school, which means like they would hit you if they had to. Right.
Okay.
So now the thing is, if you got hit in Japanese school, you are not telling your parents about this,
right?
Because they would hit you too, right? So I just remember I was in school and I got hit, and later that week we're at the Japanese market. Now there are only so many. There at the time that was like the only Japanese market in the San Gabriel Valley. Okay. So of course we run into my teacher there, and my teacher goes over to my mom and explains like this happened, and so I had to hit your son, and my mom bows and she's like, "Please hit him more." So, but anyway, a lot of memories in that market. I've had their sushi forever.
Fish market. What's
Yama. I don't know. I'm not sure.
That's legit. Okay.
But their tuna rolls are incredible.
Yama Fish Market, San Gabriel, Yama Sushi Marketplace. There you go.
Yeah. So that's
all right.
Favorite.
Where do we follow Dylan Hernandez? What are your favorite social media outlets?
Favorite? I don't have a favorite. I hate all of them.
Follow you and find you besides reading the actual LA Times. Subscribe to your local newspapers. Again, I have problems with the LA Times, but it's so important to support local journalism. But aside from that,
most of the things I think are Dylan O. Hernandez.
Yeah.
And then I think
Otani, right? Dylan Otani.
My middle name is Osamu.
Really?
With a U at the end, not to be mistaken with Osama, which a lot of people joke about. It's a Japanese name, and now my grandfather's name on my mom's side is Shusaku, and that Shu, the character for that. Can also be read as Osamu. So that's where that came from.
Okay.
So Dylan O. Hernandez, and I think maybe Instagram or one of those, it's like D.O. Hernandez. Maybe it's TikTok or one of them. I don't know. I don't even know.
Figure it out. In other words, the man doesn't want to be followed outside of the LA Times. No,
well, I post like links.
I think Twitter is where I follow you the most. Yeah. I mean, aside from real life. But so is that your go-to? Yeah,
because right now, I mean, I keep telling myself that I'm gonna I need to get on TikTok and at least talk before games or something and post links, but I just haven't gotten around to it. It's kind of like your diet that you were talking about before the show. I'll start tomorrow.
Still need to lose 20 pounds, folks. Honestly, okay. You're Dylan O. Hernandez on Instagram at least. Yeah. So. All right, good. Dylan, thank you for being here, man. Hopefully see you soon.
Well, congratulations on all your success, man.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
No, again, seeing where we are because we're kind of in a way in the same space, right? And, really admired what you've done here. So, yeah, maybe you can come run our place in a few years when things are really bad.
Well, thank you, buddy. Keep up your good work, and thank you for speaking out on behalf of the people of Los Angeles, because that was something that was very necessary and very important. So thank you for coming here, and remember to like, subscribe, share, and follow my man Dylan Hernandez. All right, LA, it's been a minute.